Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Grace Church on this Tuesday, September 22nd. We are back with another installment of our hymn series. Last week went really well. Thank you for all the great comments. Lots of people were in touch to say they enjoyed a particular hymn or something about the hymn series. And so that makes me happy, makes David and I are very glad to bring these things to you when we know that it brings some joy into your day. So this week we can dispense with the general history, yay, and just get on with addressing some hymns. So we'll do some different styles today. And our first hymn is going to be hymn 665 in the hymnal 1982. The tune is Michael, and the first line is All My Hope on God is Founded. The Reverend Paul Twelves, who's a retired Episcopal priest and part of the Grace congregation, and a member of our music fan club here, requested this wonderful, wonderful hymn, and so I'm so grateful to him for that, because it's really a winner in every way. Say just a little bit about it, and then we can actually hear the hymn. The text is by Robert Bridges. It was written in 1899 by the poet Robert Bridges. Probably many of you know him. And it was based on a 1680 text by the German hymn writer Joachim Neander. The great lyricist Percy Dearmer said that Bridges didn't translate the German originals, but just used them as mere suggestions, not only paraphrasing, but he also eliminated verses and added some of his own. So to say that the Bridges text is based on the Neander text is just to say that it's based on it. He essentially rewrote it. One thing that I learned that I did not know is that Robert Bridges was a choir master at his village church in Yatinden. I'm not sure if I'm saying it properly, Yatinden in England. And he wrote several hymns, quite a few hymns, which he called the Yatinden Collection. He wrote this in response to being disappointed at the range of hymns that were available. This was sort of turn of the century and time, and he was looking for more hymnody, maybe better hymnody, and so he rose to the occasion and wrote some of his own texts. The original tune that went with this text was a German chorale tune, but in 1930, Dr. T.P. Fielden, who was at the time director of music at the Charterhouse School in England, sent the text to his friend, the English composer Herbert Howells. So here's Dr. Fielden. He loves this text. Maybe he's not so sure about the tune, and he thinks, I have a great friend who's a really wonderful composer, Herbert Howells. Maybe he could do something with this. So, he didn't text it to him, he didn't email it to him, he didn't fax it to him, he put it in the mail to him, as you did in those days. And the text arrived by post as Howells was having his breakfast at his breakfast table at home. And while still he opened it, while at the table, and he composed the tune that we know today on the spot. And to quote Howells, the tune was written while I was still eating bacon and sausage. So maybe that's why I like the tune so much, because it was born out of bacon and sausage. Originally, he called the tune, as we talked about, just a quick reminder of our history lesson and our hymn lesson last week. Every hymn is known in two ways. It has a tune, which has a tune name, and a first line of the text. In this case, the tune name is Michael, and the first line of the text, All My Hope on God is Founded. However, the tune name wasn't Michael originally. It was originally known as A Tune for Charterhouse. Very simple naming, right? A Tune for Charterhouse. In 1936, Herbert Howells renamed the tune Michael after his 9-year-old son, who had died in 1935 very suddenly from polio. In those days, as we remember, polio was an extraordinarily dangerous disease, and this was obviously pre-vaccine. And the family was on holiday, and they had been on holiday, went together, and his son got sick, contracted polio, and within 3 days had died. And so that next year, in tribute to his son, the tune was changed from A Tune for Charterhouse to Michael, as we know it today. I think the attribution makes the hymn's statement of faith and hope in the light of tragedy all the more moving. And certainly these days we can all know the feeling, perhaps not, hopefully not that tragic, but the feeling of feeling very challenged and still having to have hope and faith. The first line, I won't read you the whole hymn, but the first line, All my hope on God is founded. He doth still my trust renew. Me through change and chance he guideth. Only good and only true. God unknown, he alone calls my heart to be his own. And the tune, Michael, very fitting, very strong. We have 5 stanzas in our hymnal, and what I'll do today is play a little introduction, and I'll play a couple of stanzas of this hymn for you, just to get an idea of the really beautiful soaring tune. If you know Herbert Howell's music, he wrote lots of settings of the Magnificat and Dimitis, the evening canticles, for various buildings around England, different cathedrals and college chapels, and named them for the cathedral or college chapel, the St. Paul's service, the Gloucester service, the St. John's service, and so on. And they were written to reflect the architecture, when possible, of the buildings. King's College, Cwm Rhondda, the most famous, he wrote them to fit the architecture of the space. This is a very architectural hymn, I think, the melody. Play you a little of the melody first. One thing we haven't talked much about, and won't spend a lot of time today, but is what makes a good hymn tune. That's a subjective question to a degree, but I would say that you can say, if it's to be singable by a congregation of people, many of whom are perhaps not trained to sing, that a stepwise tune is helpful, as opposed to a lot of leaps. That doesn't mean there aren't some great tunes, hymn tunes with leaps. It just means they're a little bit harder to sing. This is quite stepwise, as you can see. One jump of an octave, but octaves aren't too hard because they go from one note to the same note. So if you're going to make a jump, that's a pretty safe one. And it's also a very matter-of-fact opening. And so it's all my hope on God is founded. End of story. The music does that. There it is. So this wonderful tune, Michael, set by the music by Herbert Howells, and the words by Robert Seymour Bridges. Let's have an intro and a couple of verses. So I think you would agree, a hymn full of assurance and faith, strength. It's just really wonderful in every way. Paul, thank you so much again for suggesting that wonderful hymn, 665, All My Hope on God is Founded. So we're going to do something now a little bit different. I mentioned last week that we have several resources. We have the hymnal 1982, which is our primary hymnal that we use, but we have a couple of supplemental hymnals. One is Wonder, Love, and Praise. I might have that here for you. Let's see if I can get to that in our little storage cupboard here. This is Wonder, Love, and Praise, the green book. This one's a little worn. This contains some more contemporary settings of hymns, some service music, like the things we use for the Eucharist or the Mass, the Holy, Holy, the Lamb of God. There are some settings of that. A few hymns and pieces and songs that are from different cultures, more diverse cultures, and so that's one of our supplements. The other one, which we're going to use today, is Lift Every Voice and Sing 2, which is subtitled an African American hymnal. I'm not sure that's the best title necessarily. It's a hymnal for everybody, like all of our books. There are a number of what I would call, I guess, more gospel hymns, though I'm not sure that they're truly gospel in gospel style. The other way I refer to them is more of the hymns that I grew up with, which were the hymns of the sort of rural Protestant South, Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian. And so this book is meant to supplement our Hymnal 1982 and maybe bring in some hymns that people remember from their lives in other denominations before becoming Episcopalian. So one of the hymns requested today is number 60 in Leave Us. We call this Leave Us, Lift Every Voice and Sing. How Great Thou Art. And this was requested by Lois Lewis, my good friend Lois. Lois is a co-chair, along with Phyllis Noakes, of our Altar Guild here at Grace and does wonderful work for us. And Lois is very fond of Methodist hymns, and she and I share that because I grew up Methodist and we know a lot of the same ones. So Lois sent me a list of Methodist hymns, and I chose this one. This was one of my favorites growing up. And when I was a child in Tennessee and we would sing this at the Methodist church, I thought of this as a very fancy hymn. Not at all as a gospel hymn, but this was sort of what maybe would have been termed a high church hymn in a way. I don't think of it quite in the same way now, but I have great affection for it. And it's so well known. I'm sure many of you do know it, but I'll tell you a little about it. It's a hymn of praise. As I said, likely more known in Methodist or Baptist congregations, maybe Presbyterian as well, than in the Episcopal circles. But nonetheless, it is in our hymnal supplement, Lift Every Voice and Sing. The hymn's popularity soared when George Beverly Shea sang it at the London Crusade in the Haringey Arena in 1954. And I remember my grandmother being a big fan of George Beverly Shea. He'd be on television at the Crusades, and she loved to hear him sing. And he really, it was already somewhat well known, but it really got quite famous at that time. The original text was a Swedish poem, O stor Gud. I'm not sure at all if that's how it's supposed to sound in Swedish. Written in 1886 by a Swedish pastor, the Reverend Carl Boberg, and was inspired after he was caught in a midday thunderstorm, which was followed by brilliant sunshine and then peaceful sounds of nature. So if you know the text, you know that you can see where that's going, amidst the rolling thunder, so forth. The hymn was later translated into German and then into Russian. And it was the Russian version that the Reverend Stuart Hine came across in 1933 when he and his wife were English missionaries in the Ukraine. Later, on their crossing into Subcarpathian Russia, the mountain scenery inspired the first three English verses we know today. So not unlike some of Carl Boberg's writing and words, but the verses we know today really came from Stuart Hine. They were inspired by the mountain scenery as they were making their crossing. And then the fourth verse came after the war when the couple was back in Britain. That's when he added the fourth verse. The tune is an arrangement of an old Swedish folk melody and is quite singable. We talked about stepwise. If you think about this hymn and you think about not the refrain, but the verses. Very stepwise. And then that repeats. The refrain, a little more jumpy, but approached nicely and easy to sing. Big jump. Another quick word about this. It's quite high, actually, this hymn. It goes up to an E flat, which for the average untrained singer is relatively high if you're singing the melody. It also has a fermata printed in the hymn. A fermata is, if you remember back to elementary piano lessons, is a bird's eye. It's a semicircle or a half circle with a dot in it. It means to hold the note longer than the written value. And in this particular edition, it's over an eighth note, which means you're going to hold it a little bit, but not too long. A fermata over a quarter note usually means longer, over a half note longer, etc. And then the note after it does not have a fermata, it's an eighth note. So literally, this is what's printed here at the end. Fermata, then. I've heard this hymn my whole life, and I've never heard anybody sing, "How great thou art, how great thou art." It's morphed over the years into, more often, how great thou art. The great is really turned into a quarter note, thou is turned into a quarter note, and then the final chord. And that actually makes more sense because that's measured and it's easier for a group of people to do that. A fermata means you decide how long you hold it. If you don't have a song leader, which in many Protestant or rural denominations there would be a song leader in front of the congregation, but if you don't have that, knowing how long to hang on is a little tricky. So when I play it these days, I play it the way I just did. So Lovely Tune brings back a lot of memories for me, Lois, from First Methodist Church in McKenzie, Tennessee. So I'm going to just play a couple of verses for you of this lovely hymn. And if I were playing an introduction to this hymn, I would probably just play not the refrain, but the first line. Such good memories. I did a little text painting that you probably can't hear across the microphone that we have, but when we got to "I hear the rolling thunder," I played an open fifth in the pedal, 2 notes. And if you were here in the room, you would feel a rumble. It would sound a little like thunder. So just know that I did that, I promise. Thank you, Lois, for that great suggestion. I'm sure that made a lot of people very happy. So to close today, we're going to go back to our hymnal 1982, hymn 690. This hymn was requested by Louise Clark, another very, very dear friend and parishioner here at Grace Church, who I miss seeing. like everybody. So Louise will be together today through this hymn. Louise has suggested 690, which is Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, with the tune name, I'm not great at Welsh. David, are you a Welsh speaker?
Not really.
Yeah, it's the tune name is Cwm, and then Rhondda, but with two D's, and I think it's Cwm. I think the C. David's nodding yes, so we'll go with that. Cwm Rhondda, which actually I'll tell you later, but it means the Rhondda Valley is what it's referring to there. So just an interesting bit about this. This is such a great hymn. The first hymn we did today, very Anglican. The Herbert Howells Michael tune to All My Hope on God, very Episcopal, very Anglican. The second hymn, much more in the Protestant evangelical realm of hymnody. So this hymn, I think, might be really a mix of both. Sort of bridges the gap. This is one of the great Welsh hymns to come into use in English and has been translated into 75 languages. I don't think I even knew there were 75 languages. I'm kidding, I sort of did. And it was written by, now get ready, it gets confusing, it was written by William Williams. And he was sort of known as the Isaac Watts of Wales. You remember we talked about Isaac Watts last week? Joy to the World, Oh God Our Help, wrote dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of hymns. The only difference is that while William Williams wrote tons of hymns, this is the only one for which he's famous. But I guess in Wales, he's their Isaac Watts. The words first appeared, I got so tangled up trying to follow the history of the words, so I sort of simplified it. If you want to Google it and find out more, go for it. The words first appeared in Welsh in 1745, published by William Williams in Bristol, England. In 1771, it was translated into English by, get this, Peter Williams, but no relation to William Williams. And then, or possibly, William Williams, see now I'm confused, William Williams, or possibly his son, then made another English translation. So, William Williams wrote it in Welsh, Peter Williams translated it, then William Williams, or his son, I don't hope his name wasn't William too, translated again into English. And that's the translation that basically gives us the 3-stanza hymn we have today. I'm focusing today on Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah. We also have this same tune to the text God of Grace and God of Glory in our hymn book, but we're going to just focus on this today, on this text and this hymn. The tune, Cwm Rhondda, or Rhondda Valley, was composed by the Welsh composer John Hughes for a Baptist singing festival in 1901. The tune is immensely popular. Now this is, I'm quoting now, the Hymnal Companion. You may remember the big book I showed you that our church Hymnal Corporation publishes, so that to give us interesting information on hymns. So these are their words, not mine. The tune is immensely popular due to its rigor and vulgar appeal. They do go on, thank goodness, to say that that's not necessarily a bad thing in a hymn. In other words, people like it. So I don't know that I'd say that's vulgar appeal just because people like it. This attribution about the hymn, being vulgar is it was really funny actually. It's a bawdy hymn in the best sense of the word, and I think that's why people jump in and love to sing it. If you think about, I'll just give you a quick, let me get back in my right buttons here. All right, so the hymn is. It's very different from our last hymn last week. Nobody could say anything about that being bawdy, of course. This is bawdy, but in a good way. And if you remember the end of this hymn, so the basses in the choir get very excited around this time because they all want to do this. Lead me now and evermore, evermore. You always have to shut them down pretty good there and say, remember basses, don't get carried away. But it is kind of fun to sing. And almost a fermata, even there's no fermata in the hymn book, often, and I do it myself, little fermata here. And you can do some really fun things with this. I told you I don't like to reharmonize hymns much. I think it confuses the congregation. But passing notes, things like that can be helpful. So what I often do in the last stanza is put a little scale in. You won't see it with my feet because I'm playing down low, but I'm going to put a D major scale in. bit of kitsch to make it more fun. So what I'll do today, to close our program today, and again, Luis, thank you so much for suggesting this. It's a great hymn. People do love to sing it, vulgar or not. I'll play a little intro, I'll play the hymn, and then I'm going to play you, to close the program, a version of the hymn by Paul Manz. I played a piece of his on my organ concert a week ago. He wrote lots of hymn tune settings of hymn tunes for organ. So it's in a different key. In the hymnal we're in G major, and then we're going to jump to F major for this little postlude on Cwm Rhondda. But it's really, really fun, and I learned this early on as a quite young kid, learning to play the organ. And Paul Manz, I mentioned my scale that I put into the hymn. Paul Manz gives you a scale workout, and you really get to learn how to play F major scales in the feet. So he does that, and that makes it a lot of fun when it comes back. So I'll give you a little intro, we'll play a verse of the hymn as is, and then I'll leave you with Paul Manz's setting of Cwm Rhondda for us today. Cwm Rhondda.